Hi, Graham Vincent, violin maker and musician. It's Q&A time. So I've got a cup of tea. I've got my Christmas present from my wife, which is my nice insulated dungarees on. So despite the fact it's actually quite cold here in Somerset, UK, I'm actually as warm as toast. Well, apart from my ears and the end of my nose, but there we go. I printed off the questions. So without further ado, we shall dive in. I've got several questions from Aaron on Patreon. So I noticed a few others are asking similar questions to me, and now I have a ton of questions about the neck F-hole bridge string relationship. Okay, yeah, we did talk about that, but quite clearly, if there are still questions to be answered, then I didn't cover it well enough by the sound of it. So luckily, I brought a violin with me to point at. Body length about 350. That is correct. Oops. Starting with the wrong end of the ruler there. So yeah, it's a little bit over on this one. It's like 355 or 356. It's a bit hard to tell with the shoulder rest in the way. F-hole top edge. So F-hole's top edge there is at the midline of top plate, which is the point between the upper bout radius. Well, upper bout radius, I'm assuming is that measurement to here, so there, and lower bout radius. I must admit, Aaron, I've not actually seen this spelt out in these terms before. So lower bout radius. So are we saying midpoint between those? Let's have a very quick look. Let's try and do this whilst, so the radius would be kind of about there to about, what, about there? So that would be, I'm doing this in inches because it's easier for you guys to see on the video. So that would be about 8 1/4. So that would make it 4 1/8, which it's not. They're higher than that. Yeah. See, I'm not sure about that measurement. I'm not sure about that measurement, unless I've completely misunderstood it, which is entirely possible. I've spent my life misunderstanding stuff. My wife will vouch for that. So the inside neck, that one is 196 from the top plate edge. It may very well be, but to me that's not an important measurement. Yeah, but as it happens, mine is 196. Space between the top eyes is at least the width of the bridge. That's the solid bit of timber between those top eyes. That for me is really important, and there's a very logical reason for that, and that is basically it means you've got continuous fibers running through from the bridge, and so that's got to be best for the transmission of sound. So you could argue that actually breaking that up so that this center section here was more free to move, you might argue that was beneficial, but nevertheless, that's my reasoning, that you want continuous fibers running through, and that is generally accepted, and yes, so I personally think that's a very important measurement. Bottom eyes are about 12 mil from the edge. Again, that's important anyway, simply because you don't want these too close to the edge, because otherwise you always get cracks sort of coming along the grain from that eye to the edge. So just for structural reasons, that's a really good idea. Neck angle is set to give 27 mil over the top plate, surface of the bridge. So yeah, that's basically sort of measuring from the top of the fingerboard across and then down. Okay. So if I change any of that, I would change the amount of force the strings put on the bridge. No, the neck angle would change the force on the bridge. If I make a neck that's 130 millimeters to the nut, And so, yeah, there to there, 130 mil. I'm sorry, I'm aware that this is a little bit disjointed, but I am actually reading this for the first time and answering it for the first time as we go. Yeah, 130, that's what I do. And so he's saying, if that's set, and this is this height, this angle, therefore that height is set, then how could the bridge position be different? If it's not at 196 in a nick, then wouldn't it affect the force? What about bass bar placement? If the bass bar height is tallest at the bridge, wouldn't moving the bridge also change the plate's responsiveness? Yes, it would in theory, but we're talking about a tiny bit of that. Okay, so here's my answer to all of this, okay? And people always comment on how easy my violins are to play. So we're working from a premise of this feels natural in the hands of a player. Okay, so for me, important is the relationship between the back of the peg box, you know, that point where that strikes, and the nut. If generally the face of the nut onto the fingerboard wants to be in a line with this here for me, okay, because that gives the player a really good reference, okay. Then 130 millimeters, as Aaron describes, is the generally accepted measurement from the face of the nut to the body. Now, of course, the body at that point is covered up by the neck, so you have to kind of project through where that top of the body, imaginary top of the body, would be. And so in fact it's slightly, generally there's still a tiny bit of an arc at that stage, so that's a little bit shorter than 130. Sorry, that's a little bit longer than 130 if you measure at the shoulders there, because you've still got this tiny little bit over and above that. Does that make sense? So that's important. This, you have to decide what your string length is going to be. And, you know, if string length in Japan is generally shorter than string length in the United States or in Europe, because this is sweeping statements galore here, because generally Japanese hands tend to be fractionally smaller, apparently. So I don't know anything about that. And certainly, you know, there's a difference in hands between male and female sort of size of hands as well. So generally, although you want the string length to be about the standard, in Japan it tends to be a tiny bit shorter. So we have now got a situation where that's a given. The string length has been decided. We know that the back of the bridge is going to be perpendicular to the underside of the plate on the front. So it dictates the position of the bridge. And that's the most important thing for me. The actual the center of the bass bar, you know, how thick it is, and what I accept Aaron's point that moving the bridge on the bass bar will have a slight difference to the sound, possibly, but I think it's negligible, to be honest, compared to some of the other things that are going on. For me, those nicks are something I put in very late in the day. I mean, obviously I've worked all of this out. I know the string length that I'm going to be using. I know the angle that I'm aiming for. I know the stop length and everything. I have a very good idea where the bridge is going to be, and so I position the F holes accordingly. But nevertheless, I put the nicks in very late in the day, because at that stage I know exactly where I want the bridge to the millimeter, and so it doesn't mean for the life of that violin, you know, the nick is, or the two nicks are, you know, 1 millimeter off from where the ideal string length is. So God, do you know what? This 10 minutes so far, this video, and I feel as though I've gone over and over the same thing, badly explaining it. But I hope you've managed to gain that little bit of information from there. We'll see. Okay, next question, which is also from Aaron. Now, Aaron sent me a whole load of pictures of a double bass that his family have sort of had in the family. It's been passed down to him, and it's in a bit of a sorry state, it has to be said. Let me just read what he says. Cracks in several places on ribs, part of the upper bout missing. I'm not sure what wood it is, maybe red spruce. I'm not sure how best to attach the new bout. What about cleats? Rules for making them, how many, how big? Okay, so I am going to have to do some editing on this video because, I mean, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop in some of these photos as we go. So, now, this double bass, it might look a bit poor at the moment, but I think it's completely repairable. So that's the first point. Is it going to be staying black is the first question, because I mean, obviously that kind of makes your choice of timber for the front a lot easier. If it's not, you know, because it's going to be covered up. But if it's not going, if you're thinking of stripping it back, then it's probably an idea to actually strip back the front so that you can see more closely what kind of piece of wood it is you're trying to find to match the front. Whether it's red spruce or some other, I think that might just simply be down to the age of the thing. Let me, bear with me 1 second. This is spruce, but it's a piece of, it's a front that's been on a violin maker's sort of shelves in his workshop for over 40 years. So, I mean, you can see where I just planed a little bit off there. You can see we're back to the colour inside it. And it could well be that what you're seeing is just that discoloration through age. So I think it's likely, it's most likely that the front is spruce. So that's something to consider. So you probably want spruce, I suspect. I think you're going to have to take the front off. Okay, so I'm sure you probably know how to do that, but you want a fairly thin palette knife and just work your way around, and just, it should come off. I would say whatever repairs you do to this, use hide glue. Absolutely fundamental. That's really important. Once you got the front off, let me show you on this. I mean, basically there's like a portion missing, which is this portion, but I think it runs through outside of the narrowest point, so you should be able to plane that joint, and you want to be joining it with a straight butt joint, just like you would with a center joint on a violin or whatever, and glue that up, then shape it, and obviously carve it to thickness and so on. Hang on, I'm jumping about here. Spruce, glue, joint, straight joint. Yeah, cleats. The other question was cleats. How many? I'm going to drop in a photo here, which I'm shamelessly have stolen from a page called, a Facebook group called Instrument Carnage, which I sort of, which I'm a member of just for light relief, so to speak. And this is a picture of the inside of a double bass, which has, someone has spent their time counting. It has 554 cleats in it, which is a bit of a record as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, cleats will affect the sound, but only marginally, surprisingly. Even a lot of the most amazing, well-known Stradivarius violins have a number of cleats inside. And the benefit gained from actually sort of knowing the instrument's sound is massive compared with the small sort of change to the sound. They will be a nice piece of spruce cut down to a smaller thickness than the actual front at that point, and normally you chamfer them on all four sides down to nothing, so that there's no real hard edge to the sort of to the stresses. There's no focal point for the stresses, which might promote another crack. And on a bass, they want to be a good size. I'm kind of thinking, I mean, I can only say what I'd be doing. I'd be looking at making them, an inch square, which is quite hefty for us violin makers, but it's a totally different beast. And you want to be setting them at 45 degrees, really. So basically, so the grain is just, if that's the grain on the front, so they're running like that. Some people set them at 90. You can do that. Personally, I tend to set them at 45 degrees, and the only thing I'd say is don't set them with the grain on the front, because they don't really do that much. Then structurally, that's the weakest sort of direction, and as you're only talking about small additional pieces, they're not really going to be doing much if you do that. I think that was most of the questions about that, but Aaron, keep in touch on this, and if you have any questions as we go, let me know, okay? And we'll definitely sort of pick them up and have a look. A chap called Doug, who's also on Patreon and is also in the Facebook group I run, which, if you're not a member of that, you might want to join it. And basically, it's aimed at amateur violin makers, really, and it's a place where we can all share information and just generally sort of encourage each other, hopefully, to make nice instruments. So, when processing your own billets for instrument making, I've heard a number of different methods in regards to sealing the ends to stop cracking and slow down the moisture loss process. I've heard of coating each end in wood glue, latex paint, wax. Just a quick answer to that. Basically, personally, I have done this before using PVA wood glue, but I wasn't that impressed with the performance of it. I think people have a lot more success with wax being the number one. Latex paint possibly, yeah, but I personally, I'd be saying go for wax. A chap called Brennan. I'm only going to use first names as we go. I think it's better. I did a video about these molds that I've been using for these violins. Bear with me 1 second. Yeah, basically, I started off with an internal mold, but it had some I put some bandsaw cuts into it, which I just needed to finish off, and then I could change it into a skeleton mold. And that meant that I could sort of have the advantage of an internal mold for like putting the ribs on, and then the advantage of the skeleton mold for access for cleaning up and so on. You can see just how amazingly good access you have compared with an internal mold. So it's the first time I've done that. So the jury's out basically as to whether I will find some other massive unexpected problem further down the line. But just at this point in time, I'm pretty happy with it, I have to say. So, but Brennan mentioned Andrew Carruthers, the sort of fairly well-known luthier, sort of goes one step further than that. And he actually sort of works on a form which is basically, if you imagine something which, if you took a standard internal mold and just left the bits where the blocks are attached and then sawed off the curves, that's what he does. Which I don't know, I need the comfort of an internal mold when I'm getting the ribs sorted at this point in time, but who knows, we'll see how it goes. Robin, Patreon as well, actually. Question about grain and flame direction on a rib garland. Funnily enough, I have one here. In fact, this rib garland is not dissimilar to the one that he put a picture on this is in the Facebook group. He put a picture up. I don't know if they show up terribly well in the white, but this one has sort of flames which are pretty much perpendicular to the face. And his question was that the actual grain of the rib seemed to be running out, and he wasn't quite sure whether it was best if it runs to the front or the back. This one also runs off slightly, and I've already decided which is the front and the back, and what I've done is I've actually got it so it runs slightly towards the front, but I don't think that's important, because when I saw that question I thought, well, I had no idea, I don't know. So I sort of trawled through. I mean, I've been collecting photographs of, images of various violins for years, and so I've got quite a big library, and I had a good look through Strads and Guarneri and so on, and whilst there seems to be some logic to some of them, when you get to Guarneri, for example, there seems to be no rhyme nor reason, and in fact, I mean, on his, I mean, there are some where the flame is coming around here and then it's there, so I think this isn't necessarily something where there is a hard and fast rule. It's something that you just do what you want, really, I think is the best way to do it. Yeah, I mean, there was a chap called Sandy on the Facebook group as well. Basically was saying it comes down at the flame direction on the ribs, comes down to if you decide to have sort of the flame on the back set like a Christmas tree, then generally you will, so this is the top, then generally you will have the grain on the sides running that way. So if you can imagine, they produce like an A. If this is the top, the flame produce an A there. And there's a logic to that, because if I go back to the back of this thing, so they're running down, and yeah, so it means they run down and then they run up towards the front. So there will be a nice kind of pattern rather than running down and then round. That way they would kind of reverse. So that's what Sandy suggested, and it seems to make sense. And conversely, if you elect to have the flame running up, which is what I've done on a number of violins, I quite like that, I must admit. If you have the flame running up, then you would choose to have the flame running down the violin, so that if this is the top, on the bottom you would effectively have a V, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Another question, and a name I haven't written down here, which is embarrassing. What strength of hide glue do you prefer? I see 315 and 222. Any thoughts? Yeah, I'll be completely honest. For me, I just bought what was available at the time, and I can control the sort of open time by, if I want a short open time, then I make it really quite thick and just thin it a little bit if I want a slightly longer open time. But obviously if you thin it too much, then the glue itself becomes weaker. The joint becomes weaker. Now, my understanding is with 315 and 222, for example, is 315 theoretically has longer molecules in it. It's a faster gelling glue, but in terms of how much strength it has, there is no difference. So in many ways, 222, which has a longer open time, might almost be stronger, because if it gels more slowly, it gives it more of a chance to actually get into the surface of the timber. So I don't think it's massively important. This is only my view on all of this, so I'd be very interested to hear what other people think. And you may think I'm just completely wrong, but I think there are advantages to both, and you can make either one behave more like the other one simply by controlling how you mix as you go. And like I've said before, the actual sort of mix of hide glue is a dynamic thing. It's not a question of I've mixed it up once, therefore that's how it is. I mean, if you keep your glue pot warm as you're working on things, everything's evaporating as you go, and so it's always becoming more and more and more concentrated, so you have to add water. So you have the ability to control the mix very much as you go. Andrew Parrish. Andrew was the chap who featured in one of the last videos I put out. He has finished his first violin, brought it along for me to have a play on, and it was fantastic. Oak violin, oak back and sides and neck, most unusual, really. So it was great. Go on, Andrew. And okay, so his question. Can you please show me what the grain orientation should be on a neck? Okay, yep. So I'm going to do a really bad drawing here now, so this really should show up. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to draw. That's a tree trunk, okay? A section through a tree trunk. So those are the annual rings. Yep. And basically, my understanding and the way that I've always done it is that is the grain direction. Okay, so that's the neck profile. So the fingerboard would be, oh dear, terrible drawing. But, so the fingerboard would be there. Yeah, that is correct. I had a moment's doubt there. Dear, oh dear. Yeah, sorry, wasting time. But yeah, so effectively running across. And do you know what? I think on the last video, I may have actually got that wrong. When I was talking to Andrew about it, I think I said it was the other way, perpendicular, which may be why he's asked the question. In which case, Andrew, I can only apologise. I was wrong. Does absolutely, definitely happen. Brennan, a couple of questions related to my Facebook post in the new group. Okay. I was thinking of starting by building 2 violins at once. I'd basically try a new step on what would be my first violin, and then immediately use what I'd learned from the first one and repeat that step on the second. I would imagine that my second violin would be better than the first. What do you think? Or would it be better to complete an entire first violin from blocks to set up before starting the second? That's a really good question, isn't it? Because with some things, with some parts of it, that's absolutely going to help and it's going to make it easier and the second one would be better. But there are other things where you don't know you've done anything wrong until the thing's finished. You don't know you've done anything wrong until, I don't know if you play or not, but I mean, basically, when it gets into the hands of someone who does play, they might go, oh, I don't like that neck shape. And there you will be with 2 violins which both have that neck shape, although the second one done more neatly than the first one. So I personally, for the first one, I think you should do one, then maybe down the line do a couple together at the same time. Yeah, just, personal opinion here. How does one go about selling your second violin, assuming that I keep the first for nostalgia and the second is decent enough to sell? Facebook Marketplace, consignment shop, eBay, Tarisio, vending machine. I like the idea of the vending machine. Yeah. How to sell violins is kind of the eternal question, isn't it? I have seen many people who've gone through places like Newark advertising their first or second violin for many, many thousands of pounds, more than I charge even now for a violin. And I'm approaching violin number 50, and I like to think I know what I'm doing to a certain extent, and I like to think the violins are good and they play well, and people tell me they are. But however wonderful, going through that violin making school may be, I don't believe your first or second violin is worth that much money. So I think you should be realistic and accept not a massive amount. I mean, I have before now, I've put violins on eBay. This is fairly low early on, And I sold the violin on eBay for £500, which people will look at me and go, "What, are you mad?" But I think it was worth £500, and I had £500 in my pocket, which I wouldn't have done otherwise. So I honestly believe you need to be pragmatic and realistic about what a violin is worth. And if you have made something which might be worth the world to you because it's your second violin, you think, yes, I've made my second violin. But if it's an okay violin, but it stands alongside others for £400 or £500 that are every bit as good, then why is yours worth more than that? So, I would be kind of pragmatic, and for the second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever, I would be thinking, yeah, maybe take it to a violin shop and say, would you be willing to sell this? Or maybe you might do better in a general music shop where they sell guitars and stuff, and say, would you consider having this on consignment? Certainly for some of the very early ones, sell them by whatever means you possibly can. That would be my advice. I think one of your most likely outlets early on, especially if you play with other people, is going to be sort of personal contacts. And again, you might want to consider just letting them have a violin at a really modest price, simply so you get some money in, you're able to pay for the next lot of timber, move on, gain experience, and however much money you got for it, you're going to be so much more satisfied. Well, let's say I'm the sort of person who is much more satisfied knowing that my violins are in the hands of people who play them rather than being in cupboards. And if I had kept all my violins, hardly any of them would ever get played, and that's not what it's about, basically. I hope that answers that question. Have you done any ebony crowns? I certainly have. Yeah, absolutely. Not on here, but yeah, the ebony crown is that lovely little ring around there. I do them now and then when I'm feeling like it, and I really like them. It's funnily enough, I was considering this morning whether I should actually sort of try something a little bit unusual on the next violin. Where the purfling runs across there, that's a bit of a weak spot in a way, because that button, although it's only a tiny little thing, lends an enormous amount of strength to the violin, because it's the connection. It does the heavy lifting between the neck and the body. It stops the neck from twist, from actually sort of, it resists that pull. It's a really important connection, and if you've cut through most of that connection with a deep purfling channel, that weakens it. I was seriously considering whether I shouldn't bring the purfling up and then around and down, and I'd probably combine that with an ebony cap. So watch out, you may see that coming up. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, I love them. I love the look of them. Really nice. A bit of work, but personally I think they're worth it. And the last question from I've forgotten his name. I'm rubbish with names. Sorry. This was Brennan, wasn't it? Yeah. The last question from Brennan. Have you considered a live Q&A? Yes, I have considered it. It's something that I will be doing at some stage. We could provide follow-up questions. Yep. Yeah, nothing like being put on the spot with follow-up questions. Perhaps you might be putting me off doing it, Brendan. But yeah, yes, it's a good idea, and it's something I am kind of working towards. Ron, shall we say? Yeah, about the Spanish cedar violin. Lovely. I built 2 5-string banjos out of Spanish cedar. The timber was left over from exterior windows that I was making for an architect. Never thought of making a violin out of it. My banjos turned out a lot lighter in colour than your violin. Is that colour that you added? The sound of your violin is simply beautiful. Thank you, Ron. No, this isn't colour that I've added. I added a tiny little bit just to give it a bit of shading, if you like. But no, the bulk of the colour is exactly as the timber was. But what you must remember that is I was using timber which was reclaimed from a piece of furniture that was built about 150 years ago. So that's probably a lot of that colour is just simply down to its age. I suspect that's the main thing there. Right, we're ploughing through these questions. 36 minutes down. I don't want to make this more than 3/4 of an hour because you know, people lose the will to live at that stage. DIY dark matter, yes. I know I've asked you about that dream violin already, but this is my question: will you be doing any videos on it? Will you be starting it? I will be doing it. I will certainly be doing videos on it, and it depends on commissions and stuff. I've always said I don't work to commission, but I basically seem to be working to commission at the moment. This is unusual in that I actually have a violin that I've made still available for sale, because most of the time I don't have any, and people have started commissioning me rather than waiting for a violin that is never available. So yeah, I mean, as soon as I can fit it in, then I will, and you will most certainly see it in video. You bet you will. Yeah. A DIY dark matter always also asked a question about purfling and using metal in purfling, and we've covered that one before. And however attractive it may or may not be, because he's suggesting a silver ebony, silver purfling. Yes, that would look stunning, but I still think you're going to run into problems with differential expansion between the purfling and the timber. Not only expansion on a sort of regular basis, you know, due to temperature, but then also, you know, the violins tend to shrink, you know, over the 50 years, 100 years, you know, as the timber seasons. So I think you're building in an additional set of problems there. So I personally won't be doing that. Then a question from this was on YouTube from a user V-OE9ZR. The Messiah's scroll appears to be out of symmetry. The center dowel does not run even, but one side is higher than the other. Yeah, absolutely it is. I mean, this was, I think this was in response to me sort of wittering on about trying to carve these so that it looks like this dowel runs right the way through. And again, if I'm clever with my editing, we should see a thing of the Messiah now. And what you'll notice is on one side to the other, the scroll appears to be placed more higher up than on one side. So you've effectively got the two little dowly bits in the center are like that. They both run beautifully horizontally in, but they don't line up. That's just making things by hand. And I think as we are more and more used to things being made by machine, in some ways we get more demanding that stuff is perfect, and in other ways we start to value more stuff that clearly is made by hand. So as luthiers, we've got to tread this fine balancing sort of line, deciding if we want to make it as cleanly and beautifully as possible, or if we want to leave evidence that we existed and we made it ourselves with our hands and tools in our little workshops. So I've always liked a sort of, you know, a handmade look. I mean, that's a lot of people. I can't get a reflection on it there for some reason or other, but take it from, oh, there we go. Take it from me, a lot of luthiers would not be happy with with the amount of movement and shape that I've got in there. But I love it. That works for me. And I tend to, you know, the people who buy my violins obviously like the same thing. So that's the way it is. Okay, that's the questions for this week. If you've made it this far, then you are tolerant and patient. That's all I can say. Yeah, I'm signing off. I do a QA every week. subscribe, come back and watch the next Q&A. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below on this one, and then I will tackle with them next week. If you're not subscribed to that Facebook group, please do so. That we talk about all sorts of things on there. It could be a really useful resource for you. Okay, signing off. Thanks ever so much. Look after yourselves. Cheers, folks. Bye.